Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can all see and hear me and also share my screen or see my shared screen. Thanks very much for joining us this morning and looking at this webinar. So we are, just checking, we are recording the session, I do believe. Yes, we are. So all good to go. It's not going to be the full hour, so I probably realistically aiming for about half an hour, 35 minutes. So we'll save some time at the end for questions. I'll also be keeping an eye on both the chat and the Q&A to see any that do drop in during the session. So I won't be on it all the time, but I will try and keep an eye on it. So if you do have a burning question, please drop it in. Otherwise, we'll wait for the end. So again, thanks again for joining. What we're going to be talking about today is how you can minimize the financial risk when onboarding new schools through growth or merger. Growth feels like it's firmly back on the agenda. We've seen through our customer base more growth, more schools being kind of joining trusts that work with us. So we've seen more over the last 3 months than in the previous 12 months combined. There's been a huge uptick and lots of thoughts. I don't know that it's perhaps directly linked to recent announcements from Gav around more families or more schools being part of MATs, or it's linked to academy. It felt like multi-academy trusts have really kind of come of age in the pandemic, where we've seen trusts do really, really well, where trusts play the supporting role and allow schools to do school, and trusts to be that absolute kind of anchor of support and guidance to help those schools through. So I don't know whether it's linked to any of those things. It feels like there's a white paper coming. I have heard behind the scenes that there are processes ongoing around strategy for the sector and a white paper. We've also heard, is Gav going to survive? Who knows? But it does feel like growth is back on the agenda, and therefore we want to just help our customers and help people that aren't our customers think about actually how do we manage this growth with either new schools or through merger. And it's always a challenge. I remember back to, it's probably 2014, 15, 16, 17, where it was kind of the academy rush part one, where there was some huge amounts of growth. We saw trusts go from 3 schools to 20 schools in 18 months. We saw one trust add 15 schools on the 1st of September. And these things were externally put forward to trusts, and trusts thought, yeah, let's do it. And we're in a nice place now where a lot of those trusts that really had painful processes, that's calmed down. The whole sector seems to have matured, and I think the sector is much better placed to accommodate growth now than it perhaps was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when the whole sector was developing at a rate of knots. Guidance was developing, trusts were developing, systems, processes, and all the rest. So, there is going to be lots of kind of risk talked about here, but I think generally trusts are in a much better position now to perhaps accommodate if there is going to be another phase of significant growth than they were 5 years ago or so. That said, it's all about sustainable growth. One way to minimize the financial risk is to not bite off more than you can chew. So you can have the best processes in the world. If you're trying to take on 15 schools on the 1st September, that is going to be fraught with risk and challenge, and it's going to be a horrible process for everybody. Some of the biggest trusts that we work with, they've said that we will not grow by more than 4 or 5 schools in a year. And these are people with 15, 20 person central finance teams. They can't onboard more than 4 or 5 schools. Therefore, can a trust with 2 people in the central finance team onboard 5, 6, 7? That's all part of this discussion as well. Regardless of how good your processes are, there is an upper limit on actually what is achievable, looking at the team and structure that you've got in place. But anyway, it's not all doom and gloom. We've got lots of strategies, lots of things to talk about, and these have all been kind of gathered from all of the trusts that we work with. Prior to IMP, myself and the founding team worked with PS Financials for a good number of years. We've been in this space for a long time, and we've seen lots of trusts grow. And through that time, we've been able to pull apart the kind of the bits and pieces that have worked well, and perhaps where the challenges do crop up. So in terms of the session outline, there's going to be a few different bits to the session. I'm going to get the slides to work. Firstly, what what areas are we seeing alignment on, and what are those things that trusts are doing, both in reaction to growth, but also what are they doing as their general kind of operating model develops to perhaps better place them to accommodate new schools. What are the risk areas? I can't cover them all. That would be a session. I mean, there's hundreds of them, but we're going to cover the ones that we see crop up the most and actually can have the biggest impact. So, you know, it's probability versus potential impact. These are the ones that we want to highlight now, that, you know, you can put in your DD schedules, or, you know, just give a bit of extra thought to if you're thinking about growth. And then kind of, you know, once we've outlined all the risks, then what do we do? So we're going to talk through some strategies that trusts are adopting to try and reduce these risks. You've got a school join you, how do you get them up to speed with your own processes, with your own reporting in a quickest period as possible? And then kind of finish up with what's a realistic time frame? You know, what is both achievable but not too long? You know, there's lots of stakeholders involved in when a school joins that are interested in that process. There's the school, there's the central team, there's leadership, there's trustees, there's governance, there's regulators, there's auditors. So what is a sensible time frame that tries to be a realistic process, but also keeps all of those stakeholders happy? And then how can you stick to that time frame? And then, you know, at the end, open up to questions if there are any burning issues. I'll also pop my email address in the chat, so if you want to pick anything up with me directly, or you'd like to speak to people that have done these things, yeah, we're always speaking to trusts that are doing this. And if there's any particular bits you think, oh, I'd love to speak to a trust that's doing X or Y, I'm happy to facilitate those conversations, because it really does help. The trusts that are doing things like speaking to other trusts, and if you're thinking about these areas and you'd like to speak to somebody else who's been there and done it, more than happy to try and facilitate those conversations. But before we get into the session, we do get to do a brief introduction of IMP Software. Okay, so I know a number of you perhaps don't know what we do or haven't heard of us. A number of you are fabulous customers, but for those of you that don't know what we do, we're the only system that provides a map first approach to budgeting, forecasting and reporting. And what that means is that we've only been around 2.5 years, and the whole market, and this is not just kind of budgeting and finance systems, is everybody's built school software. They've been around for 10, 15 years, and systems are school systems. Everybody in the market has tried to accommodate Multi-Academy Trust by adding things over the top, or adding reports, or adding functionality to join systems together. We've taken the approach of, we only work with Multi-Academy Trusts, and therefore our system is built specifically for the Multi-Academy Trust. It's one system with one design customer. And there's a number of reasons why that makes a big difference. But, you know, the main one is that we pull together the budget planning process, so the ability to create a 5-year budget. We combine that with then the in-year forecasting or in-year management accounting. So it's one iterative process. We systemize the whole process. We remove any manual processes. We remove Excel, you know, put the ability to define what that process looks like, report and monitor firmly at trust level, and changes can then be made from the center. And the byproduct of that is then IMP is being used as the primary reporting tool for the back office within the trust that we work with. So because we hold the finance data, we've got pupil data, staff data, budget data, all of that is in a system that's designed specifically for Multi-Academy Trusts. We are the platform that people are using. And if you're wondering why we're called IMP, it's IMP, which is Integrated Map Platform. We want to be that strategic planning tool that sits right in the middle of everything that's going on, and it's the tool that you can rely on. We've only been going 2.5 years, but in that time, you know, we're really lucky to have been trusted by now over 100 Multi-Academy Trusts. We're just shy of 1,000 schools in total, of all shapes and sizes, that resonate with our message. You know, they've had some challenges with school-based systems, doing things, logging in and out of each school, not being able to do reports, not being able to change settings across all schools. We solve those. And, you know, the nice thing is for us is that within our 100 customers, or 106, I think it is now, they all operate differently. And that's one thing that you're not going to be able to get out of today, is the blueprint for your trust. We know there's a lot of variation, and for us as a provider, we know all mats are on a journey, and we're really happy to support you wherever you are on that journey today, but also wherever that journey takes you, whether you're looking at full centralization, gag pooling. We've got all sorts of those happening, and, you know, more than happy to support you on that journey, or just sit around you with a fairly traditional school-led process as well. We've got plenty of those. So minimizing risk. Okay, minimizing risk. This visual is a little bit misleading. So you cannot erase risk. We know that we can't get rid of risk. Risk is there. And this session is going to look at how you can put a kind of a blueprint around your process to try and reduce the biggest risks that will come up, and therefore get schools on board in a position where you've got confidence in their financial direction, you understand their current position, and you're doing that, you're getting to that point of understanding as quick as possible, because ultimately the risk creeps in where you don't have that understanding for a prolonged period of time and things are going wrong in the interim. And this is all around how we can kind of reduce that risk, reduce the time frame, and get to that position of comfort and confidence as we go. One thing that we get asked quite a lot thinking about this is about context. And context is obviously important. There are some really different types of schools that could be joining your trust. And yes, potentially a school that has been rebrokered or is RI and has poor financial controls is going to need some consideration. But also, just because a school is outstanding, it's Converter Academy and it's going to make a really great impact to the trust on learning or more languages or whatever that might be, those are important things to think about the support that you perhaps might give that school. But it should not impact your process for onboarding a school, because where people can be blindsided is making assumptions. So assuming that because a school is RI or because a school has been sponsored or rebrokered, that they're going to need lots of support and all of the numbers need double checking. But actually, because this school is an outstanding school, fantastic results, fantastic leadership team, we don't need to worry about doing any checks on their finances because we know they're outstanding. There's obviously probably a correlation between those 2 points, but your process can't vary that much fundamentally in terms of the checkpoints for onboarding a school. The support that you give them might vary, but actually the process is the same. We have seen, taking those kind of examples, we have seen some trusts doing kind of an earned autonomy model where it feels quite educational. Actually, you earn the trust, you earn the ability to have autonomy by following the processes, and that has been seen to work in some trusts. We have seen some other trusts that say, well, actually, no, that means that it gives people the ability to not follow the rules, because actually, well, if you don't follow the rules, this happens. Well, other trusts say, well, no, there's just not an option. These are the processes that we set out, and therefore they must be followed by everybody, and you can't kind of choose to follow them or not and have rewards or not. But another point on context is, they're going to join your trust, and whatever their context before, they're now a school within your trust and you are accountable for them. So moving forwards, that they're your responsibility. So just looking at alignment first of all. So when trusts are growing, and these points here are not really in response to, okay, I'm going to add a school in 6 months' time, so therefore what do we need to do to accommodate that? These are general development processes that we're seeing trusts on a journey going through. So starting from kind of the left-hand side, moving through to the right-hand side, starting with centralization of process, centralization of the finance function and the systems, and then moving potentially to gag pooling. And some are never going to move there. They say, no, that won't work for our trust. And there's a number that have kind of stopped at the pink management layer. But there is a bit of a feeling, and we're seeing a lot of trusts on this journey and starting to dip their toe into considering gag pooling. Perhaps not even implementing it, but there are more and more conversations around how we're going to get there, because we can see so many benefits of doing so. And just to outline kind of what these are, transactional alignment is the processing hub. Okay, so trusts are becoming the processing hub for transactional processes across their schools. So that means that accountability is still very much at school level for financial management, setting their budgets, reporting on their budgets, choosing what they spend and where, but actually all transaction processing is done centrally. So that could be purchase ledger payments, that could be bank reconciliations, VAT returns. Those processes are not being done in every single school, which means you're able to kind of centralize that control piece around banking and payments and processing. That's where I would say now a clear majority of trusts are. We're seeing more and more now move to kind of the movement of management or accountability of finances. So still ultimate accountability with head teacher or head of school, but is there a person on the ground that is then responsible for financial management within that school? We're seeing more and more now move to kind of a finance business partnering model where across 15 schools, you might have 5 business partners or 3 business partners that are responsible for the budgeting, management, accounting, reporting, and liaising with the head teacher and ensuring the head teacher has the support that they need to do what they need educationally. But actually that is a more centralized role that reports directly into the central team. But rather than central team having 15 accountable heads of budgets or budget processes, they're moving to perhaps 3 or 5, so move into that kind of business partnering approach. We're then seeing gag pooling, and gag pooling is a really difficult one and is a session in its own right. We've done loads of work on this. If you are interested in gag pooling or you're considering it, on our website there's some panel discussions with a range of people on it. We've done some one-to-one interviews with some CFOs that have done it. And we've also got a white paper that looks at centralization and gag pooling that has, I think, 9 or 10 interviews with CEOs, COOs, CFOs around what gag pooling looks like in their trust and the pros and cons. It's a really difficult one because gag pooling is a really simple term, but actually there are so many different applications. We've seen it vary from pooling of reserves, so therefore whatever deficit or surplus the school makes, that reserve goes centrally, through to a revised funding model, so therefore the trust takes all the money centrally, it deducts IT, estates, admin and management and kind of capital programs, and then it distributes out the remaining money based on pupil numbers with a deprivation factor or something along those lines. But it's kind of a reverse top slice. Rather than the money goes to the school and an element goes to the centre, the money goes to the centre, and then the remaining money after the central bits are divvied out to the schools based on a formula. And others, and I'd probably say the most common one now is a needs-based approach. So schools do not have income as a consideration in their budget. Schools are worked with head teachers to define an expenditure budget, which is the staffing that they're required, and this can use ICFP metrics to work out need and ratios and so on and so forth. But there's no concept of income, so there's no concept of a balanced budget at school level. It's, okay, what is the suitable staffing structure that we need to implement our school improvement plan or whatever that might be? So therefore there is a budget that balances across the whole, but at school by school they're managing expenditure budgets, and therefore there is no concept of surplus or deficit. It's what do I need, and that will vary year to year. And we're seeing the trusts actually saying, well, we can manage that across our 15 schools. We can manage those peaks and troughs that just happen when, okay, well, these 3 schools need IT replenishment, these 3 need estates work, these 3 have got a dip in pupil numbers that's going to affect them for the next 7 years. Whatever those things are, trusts are seemingly able to manage those more effectively as one organisation than having to balance 15 individual budgets. And those are things that would impact risk and how you can minimise risk. It's not directly linked to growing a school, but that is generally the journey that we're seeing with multi-academy trusts, and some won't ever get to the end. Some are more than happy to stop and they've got great financial management and doing that, but there's certainly a trend and more moving towards that latter stage. Okay, and then more operational. So, down from high level strategy to down in the weeds operational, and you can't get any further into the weeds than my favorite topic, chart of accounts. Okay, so for those of you on this session that aren't boring old accountants like me, give me 5 minutes, okay? This might not be that interesting, but for those of you that are boring old accountants like me, hold on tight, this is going to be a wild 5 minutes. Chart of accounts alignment is absolutely fundamental. If we think about the way to reduce risk is to onboard a school into your reporting program as soon as possible. A thing that's going to get in the way of that is not having alignment of system or chart of accounts, and that's nominal codes and departments. So you must align these things. It is a must. It's not a financial habit must, but I'll do a must. I'll do some shoulds, but a must is you must have alignment of chart of accounts before they join the trust. And what does that look like? We've seen it where when you're growing, every time a school joins, there's a process. Okay, well, let's review our joint chart of accounts, come up with a new combined one. That's just unsustainable, and you're changing your existing chart of accounts every time you have a new school. The approach should be and the approach we see work the most is, okay, here's our chart of accounts that you need to map into. What doesn't fit? And then the only review process is around the things that in the joining school that doesn't fit. And there are two outcomes: either the chart of accounts does evolve to make sure those things fit, and that's fine. You know, if this is a new thing, like, I don't know, they maintain the caravan park, these are genuine examples, or actually they've got to maintain the bus stop and the phone box because of some land issues, genuine examples. We're going to need to do that. That doesn't fit in our structure, but we do need to report on that. But it might also be, okay, well, it doesn't fit in the way you currently do things, but within our trust, we do things this way. And therefore, because you're going to be doing things this way, you no longer need to run things like that because it's going to work this way. So there is that review process, but it's a what doesn't fit and let's discuss those, rather than let's chuck all our codes in one pot and then make a new one for everybody. That can vary if you're thinking about merger, and merger will all depend on what that merger looks like. So if I've got a 15 school trust and I'm merging with a 3 school trust, it's probably not going to look very different from that first example of, okay, what doesn't fit? But if I'm a 7 school trust merging with another 7 school trust, the chances are the new trust of 14 schools is going to operate quite differently from each of the 7 school trusts. So in that example, it would make sense to say, okay, well, how are we going to run things? What is our operating model going to look like? What is the accountability model going to look like in terms of budget management? And then build the chart of accounts from that. So I would suggest a much wider review on a merger that is a big change in terms of organizational future. And if you're designing a new chart of accounts, I think you're pretty well advised to start with the DfE chart of accounts. We've got all of our customers thinking, do I move to it? Do I not move to it? I think if you're quite happy with your chart of accounts, you can map to it, because as long as you've got the ability to report against it when you're doing your BFR, your BFRO and AAR, that's fine. If you have to start again and design a new chart of accounts anyway, like a merger, then just move to the chart of accounts. It's not a bad one for income and expenditure. It does give you the ability to have extra analysis. So there's a 0 digit at the end of every code, which means you can have 9 levels of extra analysis. But if you're having to review things anyway, bite the bullet and move to it. And, you know, is it going to be mandated in the future? They're very clear that they say it won't. But, you know, these things can change. So I'd probably take the opportunity to just move to it at that point. But whatever you do, always stick to core principles. And I'm really boring about banging on with this. Where people can get in a bit of a muddle with their chart of accounts is mixing up the concept of a what and a who. So a what is a description of income and expenditure. What is this income and expenditure? And then a who is a department or a cost center, or that extra bit of analysis. This is a budget holder. So it's the what and the who. And some examples of these are, let's just use a really simple one, the swimming club. Okay, so the swimming club, we see swimming club income as a nominal code. That's fine. It could go into other income or self-generated income or curriculum income or whatever those, but swimming club income has its own line. That's okay. But it's where we get then swimming club expenditure as its own nominal code. That's where we get into a challenge, because within there, you've then got some external staff or some external kind of tutoring. You've got room hire for hiring the pool. You've got transport for the minibus. You might have some refreshments that are hospitality or whatever those things are, but all of that is now lost within swimming club expenditure, whereas those codes already exist. You can already got external consultancy, you've already got room hire, you've already got transport costs. Swimming club should be a who, not a what. And it's a really simple concept to just have in your mind when you're doing these things, and it's being consistent on that and making sure nominal codes are always what's and departments are always who's. And when you start merging those two, it can get quite messy quite quickly. It can start to unravel. Right, for those of you that aren't born old accountants, welcome back. We're done from chart of accounts. We can now move on. Centralization. So this is back to that kind of first part on the journey. I try not to preach too much, and you know, there are lots of different ways of doing things that can work. I would draw the line on centralized bank accounts. It's my second must. You must try and move to centralized bank accounts in terms of reducing risk when schools joining the trust. There's a number of efficiency arguments around that, but forgetting the efficiency argument, the most common fraud that we still see, and there's still examples that happen all the time, is somebody phones up finance team, says, hello, I'm from supplier X. We've now changed our bank details to this, and the next payment goes out and pays the wrong person. You know, if you're a 15 school trust, by not having centralized bank accounts, you're giving the fraudster the opportunity to ring 15 to check your processes 15 different times. Whereas if you've centralized your banking and you've got centralized control around how you update bank details for suppliers, you've got one process that they can have a crack at. And that's really simplistic. But the arguments for not doing it are generally around, well, people are quite protective of their cash. There's no link between cash and reserves. You know, there is an argument around gag pooling and reserves. I don't want the trust to take my money. That is a cultural piece and discussion to have, but it's completely irrelevant for the discussion around cash. The cash figure in the bank account does not equal to the reserves figure in the stat accounts, and therefore that number is meaningless, can cause confusion, and can also be quite misleading if there's capital numbers, if there's debtors, if there's creditors. All of these things mean that that cash number is wrong. Reserves is the true figure to monitor. So I'll stop preaching now, but it's the biggest impact efficiency wise, but also from a control environment. Got to centralize those bank accounts if you can. Purchase ledger then, yeah, similar in terms of the fraud piece around managing suppliers and being able to accommodate or not accommodate fraudsters. We don't want to accommodate fraudsters, but to combat fraudsters with a strong control framework, but also around probably procurement, having control over the setting up of a new supplier, however that process can manifest, is a big step forward for kind of rationalizing spend and thinking about that fraud and control piece. And also around related parties, it's all much easier if you've got the ability to look at that process centrally. Again, if you've got 15 purchase ledgers, 15 sets of supplier lists, there's just so much opportunity for inconsistency or potential fraud and error to creep in as well. Okay, right, those are some alignment pieces. So moving on from those pieces, okay, bit of a slide issue. Okay, I'll come back to that. Okay, so what are the risk areas? And this is by no means a definitive list, but from us implementing 108 MAP budgets, this is what we found most frequently from, okay, well, here's a starting budget. And when we look in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months time of where these differences are, these are the areas that come up time and time and time and time again. And the reason for this is it's really difficult. You know, budgets and finance within schools is really difficult. There are so many things, so many assumptions, so many calculations that go into a budget. And those things change all the time. There are also different ways to interpret the same guidance. There's also the same guidance that can be given in different ways that leads to that interpretation. It's just really difficult, and there's just so much variation. It's not a surprise. This is not a criticism to say that these things go wrong. It's just a kind of a matter of fact that they do. And the first one is always the biggest challenge. You know, the risk areas of culture and people. And where we see the biggest challenges is, you know, if, for example, a trust has a manual on this is how finance is done within an organization, there might be 15 pages on do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And there's a whole program around that, but there's nothing around onboarding the people, around how do we integrate? Why do we do this? Why do we do it this way? What's the benefits of doing this? The people are often forgotten. It's always focused on the mechanical pieces. And if you lose people, you're going to be fighting against that. So being able to onboard the people and bring people along with this process is a fundamental part, and that starts way before we even get into the nuts and bolts of onboarding, kind of trial balances and numbers and all the rest of it. Get the people to come with you, because it's going to make your life much easier. And I know you'll hear that everywhere, but yeah, put in the effort, or at least within your framework, have specific efforts around how we're going to engage people as part of this journey. Where we see the biggest creepage, shall we say, is around off payroll or off budget staff costs. And there's a few different examples of these, but a risk area for onboarding school is, okay, well, here's our staff budget. This was my last month's payroll. But if there is a culture of lots of supply, use lots of agency supply, or a culture of lots of overtime claims, or lots of casual staff that come in and do bits and pieces, it might be that they're not as well accounted for in the budget, and can actually mount up quite quickly. So understanding those non-salary, they're still staff costs, but not the core salary. Most people have a generally good picture of the salary piece. So, you know, we know the pay scales, we know the hours, we know what that is. It's those bits around the edges that can escalate and become apparent quite quickly that you need to get a handle of, because that can be the difference between, you know, meeting a budget and not. But this is a massively broad area, but given that there are hundreds of assumptions and calculations that are in budgets, having assumptions that are incompatible is a big risk. And that's just as simple as, you know, right now, there's a bit of uncertainty around teachers' pay award in September, and as there always is. So therefore, you as an organisation would have made an assumption to say, okay, well, we're doing 1%, or we're doing 0%, or we're doing 2%, or whatever. A school that's joining may have made a completely different assumption. And 1% of teaching costs is a big number. So understanding the assumptions that the school that has joined has made is a key part of this, and where possible, align their assumptions with yours, because when they join your trust, you need to make sure everybody's got those consistent assumptions, not a variety, because they will all come out in the wash, and there's going to be an inconsistent impact with some schools having these assumptions and other schools having these. And that's, you know, teachers' pay award is an obvious one, but there are a huge number of these. If you think about pay and pensions grants, they've been through some change in recent times. Have they been effectively managed? A pupil premium, free school meals, the difference between January and October census, RPA, top slice, minimum funding, national funding formula. There are some big assumptions that you're all making, and there's a chance, or there's a big chance, or probably a probability, that your assumptions will be different from other people's assumptions. And that's fine when they're different, but when you join together, you've really got to get it under the hood and not just take, oh, here's the budget, thank you very much, I'll put those in. You've really got to dig down on those assumptions. So, you know, if you can add that to your DD profile, that would be beneficial. Inaccurate data or calculations is just a calculation risk. So if, you know, whilst we've got assumptions that have been, I'm going to say a 1% pay rise or a 2% pay rise to my teachers, actually, has that been implemented per their assumption? There is a whole other risk of, regardless of what the assumption is, the written assumption, does that actually translate in the numbers? And we see that so often where, well, the assumption is that this is going to happen, but that's not what the numbers are saying. So you've got two forms to look at these numbers: is checking the in theory assumption, and then also kind of ratifying those that they are also then embedded in the numbers, because there's kind of a double whammy impact on that as well. With mergers, there is a whole issue. You know, when a MAT is joining another MAT, or a trust is joining another trust, the aggregation at trust level is a potential area for problems. So if we think about what some of our trusts do, and it's all quite normal, is that we've got trusts that do top slice, so therefore they're reallocating money between schools and the centre. We've got other trusts that recharge central finance to the schools. They recharge school improvement, they might recharge some estates or premises or sports provision. There's all of these transactions going on within a multi-academy trust, and hopefully they all balance out to nil, and it's a nil effect overall. But given the fact that MAT systems can be quite challenging, if you're having to do this within school systems environment, the only way you can actually put these in is to go in and out of each of the school and the trust, so you're not actually tying them together. So there is a big risk that these things that exist within trusts just don't net off, and they're one-sided or they're double counted. We see it all the time. So really think about, okay, what do you have if you're merging with another trust? What trust reallocations do you have in your numbers? And then being able to kind of unpick those is really important. Rebrokerage, or even, you know, bringing in a school that might be a maintained school, there's then another thing around, you know, allocation of costs. What costs have been absorbed by the fact that that school was previously in a multi-academy trust, or even that school was previously part of the local authority? What did that entail that now isn't going to be the case? And also vice versa, what costs are in their system or in their numbers that were related to central costs that now aren't going to be the case. And also don't forget, there is incentive, and this is not saying this is anything untoward, it's just kind of reality. There is incentive for the trust that the school is getting rebrokered from, and there is an incentive from the local authority to, you know, tip the balance in their favour in terms of what these reallocation looks like. And, you know, if you can get some cost into the school that's leaving, or you can take some money out of the school that's joining, you know, this is not saying it's untoward, but it's just reality. It would, you know, trigger your spidey senses a little bit to perhaps look at those with a bit more detail. And again, that does go back to the context argument, is it doesn't change the fundamental process. Am I going to look a bit harder at these and, you know, perhaps do an allocation of or review my actuals in addition to my budgets to see where those differences might exist. Capital programs are where we see big swings or big cash problems crop up. 7 out of 10 times it's down to capital programs around the phasing of spend, the phasing of income, retentions, catching people out. If there has been capital programs, or there is going to be capital programs in the future, that's a huge risk area that you've got to put a lot of work around to give you comfort that the position of the capital program that you think is actually a reality, and, you know, similar to where that is. And also, if you're thinking about merging, or you've got a trust joining you, you're probably going to be responsible for the close down of that trust. So therefore, think about VAT, PAYE, any of those legacy issues may fall at your door. So just don't forget to review where they are on all of those things as they join. Okay, right, that's the scary bit. Okay, and, you know, I'm not being overly dramatic on those things. We see problems in those areas all the time. So just expect to see problems there, and make sure that your DD programs or your onboarding process is going to pick those up. So those are the risks. What approach to take? How do you then onboard them? So the first thing is you've got to have sufficient DD program, and you've got to try and spot as many of these things or understand these things before the school gets anywhere near joining your trust, because once they've joined you, it's too late. You cannot do anything about it once they are your problem, and people are very keen to get the school into your trust, because once it's in, that's it, it's your problem. The more of these things you can identify and understand before, the better place you will be. And it might well be that how you do that is through a data collection template. So it might be that you ask every school that's joining you to complete a standard data collection template that you have defined, that asks them about all of those assumptions, ask them about their capital programs. Because what we often see is schools joining trusts pretty much blind, because, oh no, they didn't have any budget data, they couldn't give us any information, we spent ages trying to get payroll and we just couldn't do it. That's not a risk I'd be willing to take. Yeah, I know it varies, particularly in kind of diocese-led growth, where the schools are in the diocese and they're joining the trust, and there's actually no optionality around that. You know, if that's the case, you could probably limit your DD program because it doesn't make any odds. But if that isn't the case, and there's some optionality around the schools that join you, really put some effort into that DD process and try and do as much data capture as you can up front, that is then also going to save you some time down the line. Start early. Never underestimate how long this takes, because it just takes forever, and all you've got other things to do, the schools have got other things to do. So, you know, start as early as you can on that. Systemize staff, overtime and cover. You know, given how frequently we see actual results vary from budgets due to off-system, off-payroll staffing costs, if you've got the ability to actually implement a process or control around those things on the day they join, that's a good place to be. So if cover is systemized, or if overtime claims are systemized, it stops the ability for those things to spiral before you've got a handle on them, which can help. But again, that goes down to how mature you are with your HR systems and processes. And then what do we do? Okay, so I've done all these talk around why risks exist in the budget. And whilst this is a bit dramatic, and of course you can't completely ignore the budget, I would be really skeptical of placing much reliance on the budget that's been inherited, because of all of those reasons I outlined. And also, a budget, as we all know, is out of date the minute it's produced, particularly more so in the last 12-18 months. So just don't inherit the budget and accept that as de facto, this is what's going to happen. Use it as a guiding element, but work from the basis that the budget is a load of rubbish. I need to create our own version of their financial path moving forward, and therefore, make sure that you've refreshed the underlying, because it's generally the underlying drivers that don't get reviewed. So you'll be reviewing the staff numbers, you'll be reviewing the cost of the staff, you'll be reviewing the budget lines, the income, the expenditure. What perhaps doesn't get reviewed is the pay scales underneath them, or the ARPU rates, or the funding assumptions. And by taking the kind of the core data, i.e. the staff contracts values, but overlaying that with your existing pay scale structures, you've got rid of that risk. Okay, so if you inherit the people and the pay scale data that's driving those, you've got two areas of potential risk there. Whereas if you can say, okay, well, this is the staff picture, let's put that on top of my staff structure that I know is correct and robust, you're removing a lot of that risk of the underlying data causing issues that may not be seen. And then, as much as feasibly possible, rebuild the budget data from scratch. And of course, that doesn't mean starting with a completely blank piece of paper, but it's really around a thought process to say, okay, review everything. Why do we need that? Okay, who does that? Why have we still got that spend? Why does it look like this? On every single line, having the ability within a fairly short period to a zero-based budget, which means review every single line in detail and understand as much as you can around the history of that line, why it's required, and what that line looks like. And by doing that, one, it gives you a really good handle of the school and actually what's going on within the school, and what do they outsource, what do they do in-house, what SLAs do they have. It also gives you much more confidence that they're going to be right. But then the first thing to do as soon as possible is reconcile the payroll for that school, because payroll is factual. Okay, there will be, at the end of month one, there is a payroll for that school. You can compare that to what you think their staffing cost should have been for month one. And that's the first time you're comparing a mythical thing, because a budget is just a guess at the end of the day, against a factual thing. And that payroll reconciliation process is your first part to actually being comfortable with the quality of the data. And then you can do that the second month, third month, and so on and so forth. But at this point, until you've got actuals and actual factual things that are happening, everything that's a budget, everything that's been inherited is ultimately a guess, and it's just a line, it's just a set of numbers. When things actually start happening, that's kind of a factual perspective to then use to then cross-cast against all of your assumptions and things you thought was going to happen. And therefore, always focus on the end of the year, the current end of year. So the forecast will take shape over a period of months. So month one, you've got, okay, we've now got 1 month of actual, we've got 1 month worth of payroll. Therefore, we've got month two to, it might be 5 months, it might be 3 months, it might be 10 months. But I'm just looking at this period now to get right. Okay, how do we get our income and expenditure right? When we then get to next month, we've then got 2 months of actuals, and we've got a better version of the outturn. 3 months in, we've got 3 months of actuals. So by focusing on the outturn, that's going to get better every single month. Reporting on year-to-date variance is a bit of a waste of time, because it's already happened, and all it is telling you how good or bad that kind of budgeted data is that you had in the first place, which, if you have an expectation, it's going to be pretty bad. It's just going to tell you that. Whereas looking to the outturn is also a really good thing culturally for head teachers or people responsible for the budget, because where we are today is kind of irrelevant. It's, well, actually, what's this going to look like in 3 months, 5 months, 10 months? Because if I'm over or under, I can actually make a change and say, okay, well, we need to do more over here or less over here. And we're always focusing on that point in the future, and it's going to get better and better, and you'll be more accurate as you go through every single month. So it is a cultural shift, but just try and bin year-to-date reporting, because it has its challenges. It certainly has its place in a more mature, stable environment, but adding on a new school is anything but a mature, stable environment, and therefore a forecast is a really good way of managing things as they're changing quite significantly. It will settle down, of course, but in those first few months, it's going to be going up and down quite a lot, but just focusing on the outturn is a good place to be. What's a realistic time frame? Okay, and my unrealistic time frame was me saying I was going to do this in 30 minutes, and we're 44 minutes in. So have a more realistic time frame than me. I see the irony here. Really, we're looking at 4 months, a sensible period to onboard a new school that's joining, is 4 months to have, and when I say 4 months, it's not 4 months before you have any numbers. It's 4 months to get to the stage where you're relatively comfortable that you now have a robust forecast for that. You understand their staffing, you understand their income and expenditure picture, and you're pretty confident now in your outturn because this is the third forecast you've now done. It's got better and better each time. 4 months is a good time. In terms of how we get there, month one, you have to get to a preliminary budget. And I say ignore the budget. This is based on a zero basis. From scratch, create a brand new budget, a brand new set of data that is rough and ready, and is also ideally a 12-month value. Because one thing that can also provide challenges, if a school joins and there's 3 months to go or 6 months to go, trying to create a 3 or 6 month budget, it's just an alien concept. Every budget that school's ever done has been 12 months. Every budget you guys have ever done has been 12 months. So try and always think about it as a 12-month budget, even though you're only going to use 3/12 of it, or 4/12 or 6/12. A 12-month budget discussion is just a more familiar place to be, because otherwise, if you do all that focus on a 4-month budget, you've got to repeat that whole process again when you get to next year, and you've got to think about that in a 12-month budget. So that can be something that is quite helpful. And how that actually looks is, when we set up a school, say they're joining 7 months into the year, all of the income and expenditure lines we put in 12 months worth. Okay, we get the profiling right, so it's spread as accurately as possible across those 5 and 7 months. The staffing data, we start from the first day of the day they join. So let's say it's month 7, the 1st of March is when we start the staffing data. So actually you don't have a 12-month budget, but you have 12 months of I&E, which also roll forward to drive next year. And you've got my contractual start position for all the staff, and they just roll on anyway. So they go month to month, year on year, that start position that can change. But what this shows you is, you've got your payroll rec that is going to happen in month 1. That is the biggest thing you can do to give you comfort or not in the quality of your data. And then again, by the time you've done 2, 3 or 4 months of that, you're really confident in the strength of your data, but you've also been through a whole term and have got a feel for a lot of the things around casual staff, around overtime, around cover, and what they look like, so you can also accommodate those in the budget. And one thing not to forget is that, it's particularly with a merger, if a trust has joined your trust, it is likely that you're going to be responsible for the close down of that trust. So that's going to be year-end audit. You're going to have 2 audits to do. There's going to be VAT, there's going to be all sorts of things involved in closing down that organisation, which would probably fall to you. So just don't forget that when you're thinking about your resources or lack of. That can be a real pain to do. I mean, who wants to do 1 audit, let alone 2 audits? But that is the reality if it's a merger context. And then getting towards the end, how do you stick to your time frame? 4 months, some of you that might feel like forever, it might feel like no time at all. There really is, we've got to get away from, we see trusts that schools have joined, and within 6, 7, 8 months, you still have zero visibility of data. We've still not got chart of accounts aligned. You just can't do that, because the risk of things have been going wrong for 8 months is just huge. And the things that you then might find when you finally do have visibility are going to be much worse than if you found them in month 1, month 2, month 3. So it is a challenging time frame, but it is achievable, and it is sensible on all sides. So how do you stick to it? Well, first of all, you need to set out really clear timeframes, so all of the schools know exactly, or your finance business partners, however you structure it, a really clear time frame of activities, and make sure that there is regular and well-structured support to help people along the way. So it's not, okay, here's your list, I'm going to speak to you in 4 months' time. This is an ongoing program that the organization is used to delivering, and or at least the organization have thought about what those processes are. Make sure that you've got the checkpoints in there from the outset to make sure you're on track with your 4-month onboarding program. Split those checkpoints into majors and minors. Minors are less relevant around it has to be done on this date, but they have to be done by the next major. And we've seen that quite successful, because schools and trusts, it can be difficult. There's all sorts of things going on all the time. So not having too many majors, but the majors are non-negotiable, they cannot be missed. The minors are kind of advisory, because it means you're on track to meet your majors. But it doesn't matter if you're a couple of days late on this part of it, because as long as you catch up by the time we get to the major, it just helps really outline what that process looks like. And then the most important thing, and this is really similar to how we develop our projects or deliver our projects at IMP as well. And we used to do a retrospective after every single project that we implemented to say, okay, what went wrong? Where were the gaps? What didn't work? What do we need to change next time? You know, we don't now do that on every single one, but we do that every single month, and we iterate the process every single time. And they can be quite small changes, but when you look back, if you're doing this across 5 schools and you've iterated 5 times, the process for school 5 is going to be so much better than the process for school 1. And I think having that realization that, okay, well, the first time we do this, this is a learning process. This is our best estimate of what a process could and should look like, but be really clear that it is a learning one, and it is a process that should improve with every single school that you add, because each school will be different. So you'll have to consider things and add things into the process that perhaps weren't apparent on the first one. And the benefits of having a 4-month process is, for one, it's realistic, it's achievable. It's not too short. It is, I mean, 4 months goes quite quickly, but it is really achievable to do this in 4 months. And that means it does get you breathing space from trustees, SLT, because you've outlined, well, this is our plan for onboarding a new school. You don't have unreasonable expectations of, okay, we need numbers in month 1 or month 2, but it's not unreasonable if you've perhaps not outlined what that process needs to look like and why the process needs to look like that. It's understandable for trustees to be nervous and ask for as much information as possible. Having a well-defined 4-month process that is reliable and will lead to better results is much easier for everybody, and actually trustees, governance, head teachers should be on board with that, because it's there for a reason. And I think lastly, it's Winston Churchill, I won't do it, but you've got a plan. You've got a plan of onboarding a school in 4 months, and the quicker you can do that, the better. You know, this is not to say don't try and do it in 2 months. Don't unreasonably try and do it in 2 months, but it might well be that when you get used to this, you're actually quite good at doing it in 2 months or 3 months. But if you don't have a plan, you've got, you know, much more chance of failure. You know, having a plan and missing it slightly, you're going to be in a much better position than having no plan at all, and therefore not getting through. And that is kind of the end of the nitty gritty on this. We are pretty close to an hour, so I set an unrealistic time frame for myself. We've got a case study, and there's also an interview with Leander, the CFO at Maritime Academy Trust, who went through a merger slap bang in the middle of the pandemic, which couldn't have been more challenging. And she talks about all sorts of different things that they had to think about, things that they didn't think about when they went through this process. It was a really good watch and also a really good read if you get time. And this is the start for us as a series. We're trying to do a program of activity around supporting trusts that are looking at growth and merger. And on our website, we've got a growth and merger resources hub, and we're trying to populate that with as much content as possible to be as useful for you guys as there is. I'll send the link round to that. We've got that on the emails as well, how you get to that resource hub. And lastly, we'd be really grateful following this meeting. When I end the session, it will reroute you to a survey, and we really like to collect your thoughts around your potential growth in the future, and also what areas are, you know, giving you sleepless nights. What areas can we provide additional content on, or, you know, with speaking to Matt CFOs, do some roundtable discussions or do some further webinars. Really keen to support the sector. I've got a feeling it's going to be a bit of a wild ride over the next few years. If the white paper comes and academisation kicks off again, we really want to support you along that way. So if you could fill out this survey, we'd be really grateful. And that is the end of the session. So thanks very much for attending. Thanks very much for listening throughout. I'm just going to pop my email address in the chat. Have any questions? More than happy to pick those up with you afterwards. Also now pausing, so if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat. Otherwise, thanks very much for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the rest of your summer.